on this new abandoned plantation, Dunlop plantation, and this was called the Mosquitoes at that time. And this, of course, was our near present-day Port Orange. So he traveled from South Carolina to Alabama, then to Florida. After he inspected the plantation, he bought the vast sugar plantation from Sarah P. Anderson, her two sons, George, and the late James. James had died at this time, for the sum of $8,000.
It's now 195 acres for $8,000.
And then he had to go in and rework the plantation. So he goes down to Kruger to Paster plantation, New Smyrna, bought the machinery there, brought it back up to Dunlop, replaced the damaged parts in the Dunlop mill with the other machinery. Also, he had to order lumber, bricks, and other material from South Carolina.
The McDaniels, which later become McDonald's, they bought 61 acres along the riverfront here, and they, of course, they come in 1859. They had already had the land, and then there's some other land was sold, but he went through a nightmare of trying to straighten out a lot of the property because many people had settled around in different places and claimed some of the land, and there was quiet titles and just all kinds of problems with it.
And was he House Speaker, or
he was Speaker of the House?
Speaker of the House, right?
And his picture, if you go up to Tallahassee, his picture's in the old Capitol as well as the new Capitol building. Mm-hmm. So, and he always claimed Port Orange was his home.
He was also in Florida Senate.
Florida Senate and congressman too. His first congressman from our county, Volusia County. But he died in 1916.
And he's buried.
And he's buried in Pinewood Cemetery off of Main Street.
And he's next to Jackson.
And a descendant that was a classmate of mine. We're still friends. We see each other often, Doherty Smith. And he lives just across the river here. And Chief Counts always was out in front. It was Smith's grocery store and the Port Orange Hotel. They had rooms upstairs for rent, to stay overnight, and they were there for many years, from 1929 until up into the 50s, and then a man by the name of Green operated the grocery store until they sold out and built a new grocery store where the pest control business is today, and once it was one of our U.S. post office before the pest control. The art house is there today. And behind it's where the water tank stood, and this concrete historic marker that we have out front out here was down in front of it. If you go back outside, you can stop and read the marker from World War II. But don't.
In the 1940s through 50s and 60s was roadside attractions, and one of those was Bongo Land. It was actually at the Sugar Mill Gardens, and I happened to go through and research, and I found, I think this is an authentic brochure that we pulled together and put the pieces together, and it talked about a lost mission and a Seminole Indian village, as well as the old sugar mill garden, if you will, or sugar mill, and prehistoric monsters. That's why you see all of those prehistorics, from the T-Rex to the Brontosaurus, out there. In the short period of 1950s, a gentleman tried to make it a tourist attraction, and we do have some photographs of that, and we'll put that on the production. And there was actual sign we found out recently. Some part during the 1956, I guess the road department of the state of Florida came through this area and stopped at certain intersections in Port Orange and took pictures, which we found out on the state archives. And one of those pictures is from Herbert Street, and it looked north along US 1. And on the right-hand side was I think it was the Women's Club or Library, where the dentist office is today. And across the street, there was a big sign in the woods there on Herbert, on the west side of US 1. It said Historic Sugar Mill Gardens. And so they were trying to direct everybody that way. Another unique artifact we found out recently was down in Harbor Oaks, actually in Allendale, was a gentleman who came up in the 1950s, from 54 to 1960s, with a novel idea. His name was Johnson. And let's see, thanks to unidentified from 54 to 1960s with a novel idea. His name was Johnson. And let's see, thanks to unidentified citizen, she came in, or he came in one day. I didn't get a chance to greet them, but they produced this article on the fantastic Tunnel of Fantasy. It was originally started out as the Atomic Tunnel, and it was by Mr. W.R. Johnson. He's in the bottom of the photograph here. And he had a unique tourist attraction. And I'll read from this book from Donna Steinbach, one of our colleagues at the City Hall, gave me this book, and it talks about the Atomic Tunnel. Let's see. In Allendale from 54 to 1960. Certainly one of the most unusual commercial roadside attractions in Florida was the Atomic Tunnel, located 7 miles south of Daytona Beach in the town of Allendale. It was actually a nuclear bomb shelter built back in the peak of the Cold War. The owner decided to make use of the shelter and converted it into the Atomic Tunnel around the mid-1950s. It was later changed its name to the Tropical Tunnel of Fantasy and closed after several years of operation. It was later changed its name to the Tropical Tunnel of Fantasy and closed after several years of operation. We put a call out in our citizen newsletter, and we did receive this item and some other aspects too. Actually, you can see here on the front cover, this is probably the first brochure that it came out with, and they enhanced the brochure with a nicer cool kind of walking catfish. That was one of the attractions. Happy the Walking Catfish would take a tour every hour or so. And what it was is a basic forest structure wall. On both sides, excuse me, and we'll show that on the photograph. And it had holes to let the sunlight in, because he also had orchids there. And Harold remembers going. Do you remember that?
Some beautiful orchids. He sure did. Of course, he wanted to sell to the tourists, but and some did buy. But they were beautiful orchids. They were attractive.
Well, it was a neat attraction. Actually, we got a call from a lady from North Carolina. She lived across the street on US 1. There's a house there. I think it's Motors and Cycles of Allendale. I think it's the title. It's a storefront today. She called and said her very first job as a 15-year-old kid was a tour guide of the Atomic Tunnel. And her dad helped Mr. Johnson fabricate the tunnels that went out on either side. And he was so inspired by his ability to pull this roadside attraction together, he actually conformed one of his rooms into like a round shape, and it's still there today.